This is Yair Davidiy speaking to you from the land of Israel. We represent Brit-Am, a movement that researches the whereabouts of the lost 10 tribes. We find the lost 10 tribes. We found descendants of the lost tribes of Israel amongst Western nations, amongst the peoples or the British Isles of Ireland, of Scotland, and Wales, England, and their descendants overseas in the USA and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and all other related nations. We also found descendants of lost 10 tribes amongst peoples of Western Europe in general, such as Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Switzerland, and all of these areas and related regions. We're not saying that every one of those places belongs to the lost 10 tribes of Israel, but that is where the lost 10 tribes are to be found. That is where they went to. That is where historical evidence indicates they are to be found, and also this is confirmed by the Bible and by rabbinical studies and by numerous other sources that we have used. And we take evidence from all different areas, from all different fields of inquiry, and we show how it all combines, or how it all gets together, how it all comes together into one holistic body of evidence, that with one part confirming the other and supplementing the other. And this is what we've been doing for decades, and we still do it. And every day we add new evidence or find new proofs that adds and confirms our findings. The lost 10 tribes now are to be found amongst Western peoples. And we believe that a good portion of the peoples in those regions are descended from Israel, but we don't know for sure. We do know, though, that the lost 10 tribes are there. That is where the lost 10 tribes are. That is where they give expression to their tribal ancestry. And that is what we have to concentrate upon confirming and bringing to the attention of others, and getting as many people as possible to be aware of this and to internalize the information and to strengthen it. So that is what we have. And so one of our fields of inquiry concerns names. How the names of these people, of different peoples, confirm their Israelite origins. So one of the main centres of inquiry concerns the English-speaking peoples. That is where we find representatives of all of the 10 tribes. That's where we find representatives of all the 10 tribes, especially of the tribes of Joseph. And that is where we find a lot of our strongest proofs. And we have the proof from the names. So the names that the Israelites had for themselves are still retained in historical times by these same peoples. The Israelites in ancient times were known as Hebrews. Hebrew was an alternate name for Israelite. Israelite and Hebrew are synonymous. They are different ways of saying the same thing, of giving expression to the same historical body of peoples. Abraham was the first Hebrew. He was known as Abraham the Hebrew. That is how he's referred to in the Bible. It says in Genesis 14 verse 13, the fugitive came and told Abraham the Hebrew. He's referred to as Abraham the Hebrew. Abraham the Hebrew. His name was from Abraham. His name was changed to Abraham. He was the first Hebrew. Abraham begat Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. Israel gave rise to 12 sons, and these became the 12 tribes of Israel. So Abraham was the beginner, and Abraham is referred to as Abraham the Hebrew. And also Joseph. Joseph was one of the sons of Israel. Joseph is referred to in the Bible several times as a Hebrew. See Genesis 39:14, Genesis 39:17, Genesis 41:12. Joseph himself says in Genesis 40:15, I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. See, that's what he said. He came from the land of the Hebrews. Joseph and his brother are referred to as Hebrews by the Egyptians. The Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews. See Genesis 43:52. Throughout the Bible, the term Hebrew is synonymous with the term Israel, Israelite. Israelite and Hebrew are one and the same, have one and the same meaning. They are different ways of saying the same thing or referring to the same ethnic entity. We see Exodus 1:15, Exodus 1:16, 1:19, 2:6, 2:7, 2:11, 2:13, 3:8, 5:3, 7:6, 9:1. 9:13, 10:3, 21 to Deuteronomy 15:12. Also later we have Jonah, the prophet. Jonah defines himself. Jonah was on a ship going to Tarshish. It was only Hebrew there, and the sailors asked him where he came from and who he was, and he said, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which made the sea and the dry land. See Jonah 1:9. So that is it. We have this word Hebrew. And this word Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, is Ivri. Ivri is that is how you say Hebrew in the Hebrew language. It could, in certain circumstances, and according to phonetical rules, also be pronounced as Ibri. It is written as Ibri, or the word for Ibri and Ivri use the same letters in the Hebrew language. Ibri is an alternate form for Ivri. And the early settlers of the British Isles and most of Western Europe were known as the Celts. They had Celtic culture. That is how you look at it. You look it up in an encyclopedia. You look it up in a reference book. You see that before the Anglo-Saxons conquered England, it was settled by Celtic peoples, and so too was much of Western Europe, Gaul, France, the Netherlands, all that region. The Celts ruled over it. But who were the Celts? The Celts were people who had the Celtic culture. But Celt is a Roman name, and the Romans themselves only used this name for a small section of the actual populace. The people themselves never called themselves Celtic. They didn't use that word for themselves. So what word did they use? So we don't exactly know, but we do know that they had a name, Ibri or Iberi, that appears frequently in ethnonyms and ethnic names and in place names and in genealogical records and in their legends. That is Iberi. That is how they may be referred to, and how they apparently did refer to themselves. They call themselves Iberi. What does Iberi mean? Iberi is another way of saying Hebrew. Iberian is an alternate way of saying Hebrew. In other words, they call themselves Hebrews. Dionysius of Alexandria in Egypt, in about 260 CE, he described the inhabitants of Britain as Iberi. Ptolemy, the geographic Ptolemy, around about the same time, he reported that the inhabitants of Britain were merchants and called themselves Iberi. Later, Geoffrey of Monmouth, in 1100 CE, he mentions an early king of Britain named Ebraucus, who founded the city of York in northern England, which is called Ebraucus. And we find names with this root Ibri or Iberi throughout the British Isles and also throughout all areas of Celtic civilization. Also in Scotland and in Wales, the most common place name or shorish found in place names is Abba, such as Aberdeen. And Abba is found throughout. It's also found in Wales and Scotland, in lowland Scotland, and the British Isles. Abba is another form of the word Iba of Hebrew. And we don't know what it means. We don't know what Iberi means. That is, the experts don't know. We know that it means Hebrew, but the experts cannot give you an alternate explanation for this word that is acceptable on everyone. They argue about it. The different theories that, whose fashion and popularity change from time to time, they don't really know. There are some who think that the name Abba, since in Britain, is often found where they have fords crossing over points, and is somehow others connected with the root meaning, possibly meaning to pass over. And there's still actually in Hebrew. The word Hebrew is that is the most commonly accepted explanation for the word Hebrew in Hebrew. Hebrew is based on the word Ava or Abba, which means to pass over, to go over. Possibly the English words over and other are also derived from the same root. And the Hebrews were actually may mean wanderer, people who wander around from place to place. They move over from one area to another, and that is where you get the word Hebrew from. Wanderers. So these people call themselves this. They call themselves Iberi, meaning Hebrews. So that is, we're not saying this is just so what is it? It could be an interesting coincidence. It doesn't really prove anything. No, it doesn't prove anything in itself. But when you bring that on top of lots of other evidence, of numerous other proofs which make a whole mass of evidence or proof showing that the lost 10 tribes are in those regions. This point adds to it. It confirms it. It is worthwhile taking note of. There is a divine significance for it. There was a reason for this. It's worth knowing. Abraham the Hebrew begat Isaac. Abraham the Hebrew, he was the first Hebrew, he begat Isaac. The word Isaac in Hebrew is pronounced as Yitzchak. In some places in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, is actually written as Yishchach. Can be written in either way, Yitzchak or Yishchach. In Hebrew, see 33:26, Amos 7:9, Amos 7:16, Psalms 105:9. Elsewhere, that is where it is pronounced as Yishchach as well. Elsewhere, the name Yitzchak or Isaac is pronounced as Yitzchak. This can have significance to our findings, but it's worth noting them for the moment. It was prophesied that the chosen people of the 10 tribes will be named after Isaac. See Genesis 21, verse 12. God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendants shall be called." Isaac will give his name to your descendants. That was what Abraham was promised. And we find that the Angles and Saxons, they conquered England. They gave the English people the English language, much of their culture, and they too originally came from Scythia. In Scythia, they had been known by different names, such as Isakuli, Ishkuza, Zohak, Saka, Saxon, and also the name Saxon comes from that, and all of these names can be related back in etymological terms to this root, to the same root as the name for Isaac. So in this case, in this sense, it is fulfilled that Isaac did have his name called upon these peoples, and even now these people are known as Anglo-Saxons, the Anglo-Saxon world. Even though the actual physical descendants of the Angles and the Saxons may not be that numerous, their whole culture, their whole world is named after them. So this is worth noting as well. In early medieval, also not only amongst Angles and Saxons who had picked up a Germanic language, but also the Celts, the so-called Celts. Incidentally, Celts spoke a language that is related to Hebrew, uses a lot of Hebrew words, and is consistent with the people who spoke it having originally used Hebrew, and afterwards having additional foreign accretions and new linguistic influences alter what they originally had, but they kept much of it. So this too is a proof. The linguistic evidence of the Celtic peoples that originally spoke a Hebrew type language, according to linguists themselves, is also a proof of the Hebrew origins. And all of these different proofs, a lot of possible explanations can be given to that for them, which are quite feasible. Logical alternate explanations can explain all the different phenomena that indicate Israelite origins. When you take them all together, you get something else. You get a much more stronger impact, which is difficult to claim that it is all coincidence. So too, William F. Skeeny brings ancient books of Wales, of lowland Scotland and of Wales, and their histories, and he gives us traditions that the Alban, who is actually an ancestor of part of the Scottish people, he was descended from Isaacon. Isaacon is another word for Isaac. So here too we find this name Isaac found amongst the ancestors of the British people. As we said, Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob. The name Jacob is recorded in the Union Jack. Union Jack. Jack is short for Jacob. But Britain, the flag of Britain is known as the Union Jack. No matter what its prosaic origins were, the fact is that this name is what the flag of the British Isles is referred to, the Union Jack. Also with the word Yankee for America. And Yankee or Yank is a Yiddish, also a Hebrew, a nickname, or why I was saying the word Yaakov. So wherever the origin of the name, the fact is that these people are called after Yaakov, after Jacob. So this too is worth noting. And also we have this Isaiah 49 verse 6, it says, "It is too small a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also make you a light of the nations." Jacob was also known as Israel. See Genesis 32 verse 28. He said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Again, Genesis 35:10, God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." Israel in Hebrew is pronounced as Yisrael. Yisrael. The Assyrian inscriptions sometimes render the word name, Israel, Surila, Surila. At all events, Yisrael is comprised of two names, Yisra and Ael. And Yisru is a shortened way of saying Israel, Yisru, and we find in Irish traditions that one of the ancestors of the Numidians were imported to stock one of the four major waves of migration, or the second major wave in effect, in terms of numbers into Ireland, was named after descended from the Numidians. The Numidians were descended from Israel, which is another name for Israel. And according to their own sources, what applies to them also applied to the peoples in Scotland. So here we have a portion of the people of Israel, of the British Isles, relating themselves to Israel directly as their direct ancestor. Si abus hier banu, Sikkel mythologie landers and mythologie Celtic in Paris 1884, and he gives details. Maybe my French isn't the best, but if you can read French, that is the source. So we see here that the peoples of the British Isles related themselves according to the names of their ancestors, or the names that they were known by, to the 10 tribes of Israel. In addition to that, as we said, we had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. Israel gave rise to 12 sons. These 12 sons went down into Egypt. They also had children and grandchildren. There's a list of these, of all of them, all of their whole extended families who went down into Egypt in Genesis 46. Also, we find that in Numbers 26, when they came back up out of Egypt into the land of Canaan to conquer it, these 12 sons and these 70 grandsons and so on had all become clans within the tribes, and there were 70 of them in Numbers 46, and we have a name and a list of these names, and all of these names that are given, we find them later amongst peoples who settled in Western Europe. We find them coming together and being grouped together and reunifying one with the other, as if driven by a historical subconscious drive to go to certain areas and to attach themselves to certain peoples, or to unite with other peoples. In some way or other, we find a homing instinct with people from all different peoples who we can relate to different tribal groups, belong to specific tribes, usually come together, mutually recoalesce at some time or other in history, and this can confirm our tribal identifications of the nations in question. We'll give an example. We'll take as an example the sons of Gad. Gad was one of the tribes of Israel. And it says in Genesis 46 verse 16, and the sons of Gad, Ziphion, Hagi, Shuni, and Etzbon, Uri, and Arodi, and Areli. Again we find in Numbers 26:15 to 18, the children of Gad after their families, of Ziphion, the family of the Ziphoni, of Hagi, the family of the Hagi, of Shuni, the family of the Shuni, of Ozni, the family of the Ozni, of Uri, the family of the Uri, of Arod, the family of the Arodi, of Areli, the family of the Areli. These are the families of the children of Gad, and so on. Therefore, we see a list of people from Gad. We find Gads among the Goths in history, and amongst the Swedish peoples, and also amongst other peoples in Scandinavia. the nation of Sweden became a nation when there's two major groups. That is the Goths, who are also known as Gad. Gad was another name for pronouncing Goth. The word the Goths calls themselves Gad and Godo and different names because they themselves use this name for themselves. Not only that, but in biblical Hebrew, the word Gad can be pronounced as Goth under certain circumstances. The A becomes an O, and the D with an accent becomes a Th. So instead of Gad, we have Goth for the tribe of Gad. We find the tribe of Gad in Sweden. There were two major groups in Sweden. The Goths, also known as the Gados, Gad, and the Suoni. Suoni were related to Shuoni. Shuoni, who was one of the sons of Gad, and they united and they created the nation of Sweden. But there were other tribes from descendants of Gad with them, and also in other areas of Scandinavia. And we can trace all of these names. We can also trace them in other areas where the Goths were historically important. Now we are concentrating on Scandinavia. Scipion, one of the sons of Gad, became the Thrive Valley, who were allies to the Goths. And also the region of Small in Sweden is also related to Scipion. Scipion in Hebrew connotes the northern area, and another word for the northern area is Small. So we have the area known as Small in Sweden. We have the Hagi, or pronounced Hagi. These were the Chalky amongst the Franks, Hugo, Hocking. In Sweden we have the Korki. In Ireland we have the Korki, Korkaland, and in Sweden we have the Shuni, the Suoni in Sweden. We have the Bastonai. Esbon became the Bastonai, who were a Galatian group who moved to France, but they were related, associated with the Goths. We also have the Hastings, who were associated with the Vandals, who were also Gothic allies. The Vandal group who moved to England and Scotland. We have Osny, who gave his name to Osnabrück in the Frankish area of Germany. The Eri, pronounced as a Geri in Hebrew, gave rise to the Grani in Sweden, the Gruotingi amongst the Goths. And we have the Arodi. The Arodi of Gad gave rise to the Haarudi or the Arodi on the Hagrofs in Scandinavia. Exactly the same name, Arodi, Arodi, but in Hebrew, Harudi in the conventional history, also known as Arodi, exactly the same. Another name which is exactly the same as the Areli, in Hebrew. Also became the Eruli or the Herals in Scandinavia, also associated with the Goths. And so too we have the Guni, became the Chuni, who were associated with the peoples who settled in Scandinavia. So here we have it. And this is what applies for Gad, but all of the tribes have similar applications for their clan names. And when you take them all together, you get a picture. You get a picture with one area supplementing the other and showing how from different provinces, from different regions, from different places of exit, they converged in the same areas and reunified themselves. And this confirms their historical origins. This confirms their ancestral origins and their relationship one to another. So this too is proofs. This too is a proof, and taken together with all the biblical evidence and the other evidence and the rabbinical confirmation of our evidence, this is what we have. This is proof in itself, and we add on to it and we confirm it, and we have much more of the same nature, and taking it all together, in our opinion, it is incontrovertible, and we have to learn this and know about it and promote it. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.